The gunshot split the evening air like a thunderclap as Theodora Ross ducked behind a water trough, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dodge City in 1876 was no place for a woman alone, especially one who had just witnessed a murder. The night had started ordinarily enough. She'd been finishing her shift at the Silver Spur Saloon when she saw Malone, the cattle baron's son, shoot a drover in cold blood over a gambling debt. There she is, Malone's voice carried across the dusty street. Get her before she talks. Theodora gathered her skirts and ran, the worn soles of her boots slipping in the mud as she fled down an alley. At 22, she'd survived 4 years in the West after leaving her Boston home, but nothing had prepared her for this. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed herself harder, knowing what would happen if they caught her. 3 men rounded the corner ahead, cutting off her escape. Theodora spun around only to find 2 more blocking the way she'd come. Malone sauntered toward her, pistol gleaming in the lamplight. Well, the little songbird saw something she shouldn't have, he drawled, circling her like a wolf. What should we do with her, boys? I didn't see anything, Theodora lied, her voice steadier than she felt. I was just heading home. Malone laughed, the sound chilling her blood. Strip her, take everything. We'll leave her with nothing but her shame and a warning about what happens to witnesses in my town. Panic surged through her veins as rough hands grabbed her arms. She fought wildly, kicking and screaming as they tore at her clothing, ripping her modest dress at the shoulder. The sound of fabric tearing was deafening in her ears. Please, stop, Theodora cried out, tears streaming down her face as they shoved her to her knees in the mud. The crack of a whip cut through the night, followed by the thunder of hooves. A tall figure on horseback charged into the alley, scattering Malone's men. That's enough. The newcomer's voice was deep and commanding as he dismounted in one fluid motion. Without hesitation, he removed his long duster coat and wrapped it around Theodora's trembling shoulders, shielding her from prying eyes. This isn't your business, Kincaid, Malone snarled. I'm making it my business. The man stood protectively in front of Theodora. 6 armed men against 1 woman doesn't seem sporting. Theodora clutched the coat around her, grateful for its warmth and the dignity it restored. She looked up at her defender, tall, broad-shouldered, with dust-covered clothes that spoke of days on the trail. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but she could see a strong jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble. Malone stepped forward, hand hovering near his pistol. Grady Kincaid, still playing hero, she witnessed something private. We're just ensuring her silence. By stripping her in an alley, Grady's voice was dangerously quiet. That's not how things are done in civilized places. This is my father's town. Last I checked, it wasn't called Maloneville. Grady's hand rested casually on his holstered revolver. Now, I suggest you boys move along before this gets ugly. Theodora could feel the tension crackling in the air as Malone weighed his options. 5 against 1 weren't bad odds, but something in Grady Kincaid's stance made the cattle baron's son reconsider. This isn't over, Malone finally spat. Father will hear about this. He gestured to his men, and they backed away slowly before disappearing into the night. Once they were gone, Grady turned to Theodora, his eyes softening with concern. Are you hurt, miss? Not physically, she managed, pulling the coat tighter. It smelled of leather, horses, and sun-baked prairie. Thank you, Mr. Kincaid. Grady, he corrected, offering his hand to help her stand. Grady Kincaid, and you might be Theodora Ross. I worked at the Silver Spur. She steadied herself, trying to regain composure despite her disheveled appearance. I saw Billy Malone murder a man tonight, shot him over $20. Grady's expression darkened. That complicates things. The Malones own half this county, including the sheriff. I know. Theodora shivered despite the coat's warmth. What do I do? First, we get you somewhere safe. He glanced down the alley. Can you ride? Theodora nodded. I grew up on horseback before I came west. Good. Grady led her to his stallion, a magnificent chestnut with a white blaze. This is Rusty. He's gentle enough. With surprising gentleness for such a large man, he helped her mount before swinging up behind her. As they rode through back streets to avoid being seen, Theodora became acutely aware of his presence, the steady strength of his chest against her back, his arms encircling her as he held the reins. She'd never been this close to a man before, and despite the circumstances, she found herself noticing details. The calluses on his hands, the faint scent of coffee and tobacco that clung to him. "Where are you taking me?" she asked as they left the town limits. "My homestead." "It's about 5 miles out, not much, but it's defensible, and Malone's men won't expect you there." Grady guided the horse expertly through the darkness. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do." The night air grew cooler as they rode into open country. Stars blazed overhead in the vast Kansas sky, countless pinpricks of light against the velvet blackness. In another circumstance, it might have been beautiful. "You're new around here," Theodora observed, trying to distract herself from the night's horrors. "I haven't seen you in Dodge before." "Been here about a month," Grady replied. "Bought old man Peterson's place after he passed, trying my hand at ranching after years of driving cattle for others." "You're a long way from the cattle trails." That was intentional. There was something in his voice that suggested a story, but he didn't elaborate. They crested a small rise and Grady pointed ahead. "There it is. Not much to look at, but it's home." In the moonlight, Theodora could make out a modest cabin with a barn and corral beside it. A few cattle grazed in a nearby pasture, dark shapes against the silver-touched grass. "It looks peaceful," she said honestly. As they approached, a dog began barking, a deep, booming sound that announced their arrival. When they reached the yard, Grady dismounted first, then reached up to help Theodora down. His hands were strong and steady at her waist, and for a moment they stood face to face, close enough that she could see his eyes properly, for the first time green with flecks of gold in the lantern light he'd just lit. "Sorry about Buck," Grady said as an enormous black and tan dog bounded toward them. "He's friendly, just loud." The dog sniffed Theodora curiously before sitting obediently at Grady's feet. "He's beautiful," she said, reaching out tentatively to pat the animal's head. Buck leaned into her touch, his tail thumping against the dirt. "He likes you," Grady observed with the first smile she'd seen from him, a subtle transformation that softened his weathered features. "Come inside. You must be exhausted." The cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, and a bed in the corner. A trunk at the foot of the bed presumably held Grady's belongings. "It's not much," he said, lighting a lamp and stoking the banked fire, "but it's warm and dry." "It's wonderful," Theodora replied sincerely. After the alley, any safe place would have seemed like paradise. Grady busied himself making coffee while Theodora sat at the table, still wrapped in his coat. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She had witnessed a murder. Her job and meager possessions were back in Dodge City, and a powerful man wanted her silenced. "Here." Grady placed a steaming cup before her and sat across the table. "It's strong, but it'll help. Thank you." She wrapped her hands around the cup, grateful for its warmth, for everything. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." His expression darkened. "I do, I've seen it before. The West can be cruel to women alone." "You sound like you speak from experience." Grady stared into his coffee. "My sister. She came out to Colorado to join me when I was working a mine there. Town wasn't much more than a collection of tents and saloons. He trailed off, then squared his shoulders. "She didn't survive her first month. That's why I couldn't ride past when I heard you screaming." "I'm so sorry," Theodora whispered, understanding dawning. This man's kindness came from a place of deep pain. "It was 5 years ago. Since then, I've tried to live differently." He looked up at her. "Now, what about you? How did a proper-sounding Eastern lady end up singing in a Dodge City saloon?" Despite everything, Theodora smiled faintly. "Is my accent still that noticeable to my ear?" She sighed, taking a sip of coffee. "I came from Boston 4 years ago." My father was a professor who lost everything in bad investments. After he died, my mother remarried quickly to a man who made it clear I wasn't welcome. I had an aunt in St. Louis who offered to take me in, but when I arrived, she'd passed away. I had just enough money to keep moving west, where I heard women could find decent work. As a saloon singer, it wasn't my first choice, she admitted. I tried teaching, but most frontier towns want married schoolteachers. I worked as a seamstress, a laundress, even a telegraph operator for a while, but singing. She shrugged. The pay is better, and Mr. Sullivan at the Silver Spur has strict rules about how his girls are treated. Until tonight, Grady observed grimly. Sullivan wasn't there. Billy Malone came in after hours when most of the staff had left. Theodora's hands trembled at the memory. The man he killed, I didn't know him well, just a cattle drover passing through, but no one deserves to die over a card game. Grady nodded thoughtfully. The Malones are dangerous, but not invincible. There's a federal marshal who comes through these parts occasionally. Man named Bass Reeves. He doesn't care about local politics or who owns what, if we can get word to him. How long would that take? Depends on where he is. Could be days, could be weeks. Grady ran a hand through his hair. You can stay here until then. It's the safest option. Theodora looked around the one-room cabin. I don't want to impose. I'll sleep in the barn, he said quickly, understanding her concern. There's a decent cot out there I use when foaling season comes. Relief and gratitude washed over her. Thank you. You should get some rest, Grady said, standing. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to get your things from town without being seen. My things, she gave a bitter laugh. A few dresses and books, nothing worth risking your life for. Books are always worth it, he replied with unexpected gravity. What kind do you read? The question was so normal, so removed from the danger they faced that Theodora felt tears threatening. Poetry, Dickens. Whatever I can find, really. Grady walked to the trunk at the foot of his bed and opened it. After rummaging for a moment, he pulled out a worn volume. You're welcome to this, might help you sleep. Theodora accepted the book, a collection of Tennyson's poetry. You read poetry. A faint color touched his cheekbones. Long nights on the trail, a man needs something besides stars to look at. With that surprising revelation, he bid her good night and left for the barn, Buck trailing behind him. Alone in the cabin, Theodora finally allowed herself to cry for the murdered drover, for her torn dress, for the humiliation she'd suffered, and for the unexpected kindness of a stranger who'd covered her shame with his own coat. When she finally lay down in Grady's bed, still wearing his duster for comfort, she opened the Tennyson volume. A passage was underlined in pencil. Though much is taken, much abides, and though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. The words resonated with her, speaking of resilience in the face of loss. She fell asleep with the book on her chest, dreaming not of Malone's cruel face, but of green eyes with gold flecks and the safety of strong arms around her. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. For a moment, Theodora was disoriented, then the previous night's events crashed back. She sat up quickly, wincing at the soreness in her limbs from the struggle and the hard ride. A dress lay folded at the foot of the bed with a note. Found this in a trunk. Might fit. Coffee's hot. G. The dress was simple calico, faded but clean. It had clearly belonged to a woman, and Theodora wondered briefly about its history, but was too grateful for the change of clothes to dwell on it. Her own dress was torn beyond modest wear. After changing, she stepped outside to find Grady chopping wood, his shirt clinging to his broad back with sweat despite the early hour. He paused when he saw her, resting the axe head on the ground. "Morning," he said, his eyes taking in the dress. "It suits you. Thank you for finding it." Theodora tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly self-conscious. "And thank you for the Tennyson." A faint smile crossed his lips. Did it help? It did. She glanced around the homestead, in daylight neat and well kept despite its simplicity. A few chickens scratched in the yard and a cow lowed from a small pasture. You've made a real home here, trying to. Grady wiped his brow with his sleeve. Breakfast is waiting inside, nothing fancy, just eggs and biscuits. They ate together at the wooden table, an oddly domestic scene given the circumstances. Theodora found herself studying Grady more closely in the daylight. He was younger than she'd first thought, probably around 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting against prairie sun. A small scar cut through his right eyebrow, and his hands, while rough with calluses, moved with surprising grace. "What?" he asked, catching her gaze. "Just trying to figure you out," Theodora admitted. Not many men would risk crossing the Malones for a saloon singer they'd never met. Not many men have buried a sister because they didn't act when they should have. Grady's words were matter of fact, but pain lurked beneath them. "Besides, I don't much care for bullies, regardless of how rich they are." After breakfast, they discussed their next steps. Grady had a plan to ride into town and speak with a telegraph operator. He knew a man who owed him a favor and could be trusted to send a message to Marshal Reeves without alerting the Malones. "What about my things?" Theodora asked. "Where are they? I rent a room above the milliner's shop. Mrs. Hewitt is a good woman. She won't have told anyone I'm gone yet." Grady considered this. "I'll stop there first. Is there anything specific you need?" Theodora thought of her few possessions. "There's a small wooden box under the bed. It has letters from my father and a locket with my mother's picture, and any books you can fit in your saddlebag." He nodded. "I'll find them. Be careful," she urged. "Malone will have men watching." "I grew up dodging trouble," Grady assured her with a wry smile. "Stay inside with Buck. He'll warn you if anyone approaches." After Grady left, Theodora found herself restless with worry. To keep busy, she decided to clean the cabin, a small repayment for his kindness. She swept the floor, washed the breakfast dishes, and organized the sparse pantry. In a drawer, she found a mending kit and took the opportunity to repair some of Grady's shirts that needed attention. By midday, the cabin was spotless, and she'd prepared a stew from vegetables in his small garden and salted beef from the pantry. The domestic activity was soothing, reminding her of a normal life she hadn't experienced in years. Buck's warning bark jolted her from these thoughts. Heart racing, she grabbed the shotgun Grady had left propped by the door and peered through the window. Relief flooded her when she saw it was Grady returning, though tension returned when she noticed his grim expression. "What happened?" she asked as he entered, leading Buck back inside. "Malone's got the town stirred up." Grady placed a small carpet bag on the table. "Claiming you robbed the saloon before fleeing. There's a reward for information on your whereabouts." "That's absurd," Theodora exclaimed. "Everyone knows I've worked there honestly for years." "People believe what powerful men tell them to believe," Grady replied bitterly. "But I got your things. And I sent the telegraph to Reeves. His deputy says he's in Wichita and should be here within the week." Theodora opened the bag with trembling hands, finding her treasured box of letters, 2 books, and a few personal items. "Thank you," she whispered. "I know the risk you took." "It wasn't as easy as I'd hoped," Grady admitted, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "Malone's men spotted me leaving Mrs. Hewitt's. I had to take the long way back to make sure I wasn't followed." "Do you think they suspect?" "Hard to say. I'm still new enough that most folks don't know me well. I told the men who asked that I was picking up a package Mrs. Hewitt was holding for me." He glanced around the cabin, noticing the changes. "You've been busy." Theodora felt a blush rise to her cheeks. It seemed the least I could do. "Smells good," he said, nodding toward the pot simmering over the fire. "Just a simple stew. I hope you don't mind that I used your supplies." "Mind, it's been years since anyone cooked for me." The warmth in his eyes made her heart flutter unexpectedly. They settled into an uneasy routine over the next few days. Grady taught Theodora how to care for the animals and worked on reinforcing the cabin's defenses, while she kept house and helped with chores. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, reading aloud from his small collection of books or sharing stories from their lives. Theodora learned that Grady had been a cowboy since he was 15, driving herds up from Texas to Kansas, and sometimes all the way to Montana. He'd saved every penny to buy this land, dreaming of a place of his own after years on the trail. He spoke of cattle and horses with genuine affection, and of the landscapes he'd crossed with poetic appreciation that surprised her. In turn, she told him of Boston, of concerts and libraries, of her father's academic world, and her dreams of someday teaching in a proper school. She described the gradual westward journey that had brought her to Kansas, the setbacks and small victories along the way. On the third night, as they sat companionably by the fire, a connection that had been building between them shifted into something more tangible. Grady had just finished reading a passage from the Odyssey, his deep voice giving weight to the ancient words about a warrior's long journey home. "You read beautifully," Theodora said, watching the firelight play across his features. "Most people would be surprised to find a cowboy with such literary interests." "Most cowboys are more educated than people think," Grady replied, "but I had advantages. My father was a schoolteacher before he caught gold fever and moved us west. He made sure my sister and I knew our letters and figures. You miss them, your family." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "Every day, my father died in the mines when I was 16. My sister followed 5 years later. Mother passed when I was just a boy, so you're alone." Theodora's voice was soft with empathy. He corrected, his eyes meeting hers across the small space between their chairs. "Right now, I'm not." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken feelings. Theodora felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the fire. In just a few days, this man had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. "Theodora," Grady began, leaning forward slightly. The moment was shattered by Buck's warning bark, followed by the unmistakable sound of horses approaching. Many horses. "Get down," Grady commanded, instantly alert. He doused the lamp and moved to the window, peering out carefully. At least 5 riders, armed, fear clutched at Theodora's heart. Malone's men, most likely. Grady grabbed his rifle and checked the load. They must have followed me after all, or someone in town talked. "What do we do?" "There's a root cellar under the cabin, trapdoors beneath the rug." Grady moved with practiced efficiency, grabbing extra ammunition. "Get down there and stay quiet, no matter what happens." "I won't hide while you face them alone," Theodora protested. "This isn't a debate." His voice was firm but not unkind. "I can't protect you and fight them off if you're in the line of fire." The approaching riders were close now, their voices carrying through the night. Theodora recognized Billy Malone's distinctive drawl among them. "Please," Grady urged, touching her arm. "I need to know you're safe." The intensity in his eyes broke through her resistance. With a reluctant nod, she helped him move the rug and open the trapdoor, revealing a small space below. "Don't come out unless I call for you, no matter what you hear," Grady instructed as she descended the crude ladder. "If something happens to me, wait until they're gone, then take Rusty and ride north. There's a town called Hayes about 30 miles that way. Marshal Reeves will check there if he can't find us here." Before she could respond, he placed something in her hands, his revolver. "Just in case," he said softly, then closed the trapdoor. In the damp darkness of the root cellar, Theodora listened to the muffled sounds above boots on the porch. Grady's voice calmly greeting the visitors as if their arrival was no surprise. Then Billy Malone's voice slurred with drink and menace. "Evening, Kincaid, lovely night for a ride." "It's late for social calls," Grady replied evenly. "We're looking for a thief," Malone said. "Pretty little songbird who robbed my father's saloon. Word is you might be harboring her." "I live alone," Grady stated. "As anyone in town could tell you, then you won't mind if we look around." There was a tense pause before Grady answered. "Actually, I do mind. This is my property and you have no authority here." A harsh laugh from Malone. "Authority? My father owns the sheriff, the judge, and half the territory. That's all the authority I need." Not on my land. Grady's voice remained steady. I fought Indians and rustlers for this place. I'm not about to let a spoiled boy with daddy's money trample over my rights. The insult landed like a slap. Theodora could hear the sudden tension, the shuffling of feet, the click of a hammer being cocked. Careful, Kincaid, Malone growled. Men who stand in my way tend to have accidents, like that drover you shot over $20. Grady's words hung in the air like gunsmoke. A dangerous silence followed. Then, so she did come to you, I knew it. Where is she? Gone, Grady replied. Headed for Wichita 2 days ago to speak with Marshal Reeves. The mention of the marshal's name caused a stir among the men. Theodora could hear their muttered concerns. Federal marshals were a different breed of lawmen beyond local corruption and answerable to distant courts. You're lying, Malone snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Search the place if you don't believe me, Grady offered confidently. But know this, I've sent letters to the marshal and 3 newspapers detailing what Miss Ross witnessed. If anything happens to her or me, those letters get delivered. It was a bluff, Theodora realized, but a clever one. She held her breath, praying the men would believe it. You've made a grave mistake, Kincaid, Malone finally said. This isn't over. Actually, it is, a new voice interrupted, deep, authoritative, and unfamiliar to Theodora. Everyone stay right where you are. The sound of several more horses arriving filled the night, along with the metallic clink of weapons being readied. Who the hell are you? Malone demanded. Marshal Base Reeves, federal law, and you boys are surrounded by my deputies. Theodora nearly cried out in relief. Somehow, the marshal had arrived early. Perhaps Grady's telegraph had reached him faster than expected. Above her, chaos erupted as Malone and his men apparently tried to resist. Shouts, a few gunshots, and the sounds of struggle filtered through the floorboards. Then, gradually, order was restored and she heard Grady's voice calling her name. Theodora, it's safe now, you can come up. With shaking hands, she pushed open the trapdoor and emerged to find the cabin crowded with men. Malone and his companions sat sullen and bound on the floor while a tall black man with a badge stood talking with Grady. Miss Ross, the marshal said, turning to her with a respectful nod. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your testimony about the murder is important. How did you get here so quickly? She asked in amazement. Luck, Marshal Reeves replied with a slight smile. I was already on my way to Dodge on another matter when I received your friend's telegraph. Decided to stop here first, and it seems I arrived just in time. Theodora looked to Grady, who stood watching her with relief evident in his eyes. In that moment, something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings that had grown during their short time together. The next few days were a whirlwind of statements and legal proceedings. Theodora testified before a federal judge who had accompanied Marshal Reeves, describing exactly what she had witnessed in the Silver Spur that night. Other witnesses, emboldened by federal protection, came forward with stories of the Malones' corruption and violence. By the end of the week, Billy Malone was in custody awaiting trial for murder, and his father's empire had begun to crumble as investigations into bribery and corruption spread. The town of Dodge City seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief as the Malones' grip loosened. Throughout the ordeal, Grady remained steadfastly at Theodora's side, providing quiet support and practical assistance. When it was over and the marshal's party prepared to leave, they found themselves alone again at the homestead, facing an uncertain future. What will you do now? Grady asked as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and purple. I don't know, Theodora admitted. I could go back to the Silver Spur, I suppose. Mr. Sullivan has offered me my position back with a raise. Grady nodded slowly, his eyes on the horizon. You'd be welcome to, he said carefully, or you could stay here. Theodora's heart quickened. Stay. This place needs a woman's touch, he said, gesturing to the cabin. And the school in Hayes is looking for a teacher come fall. It's only 5 miles from here, an easy ride. Are you offering me employment, Mr. Kincaid? Theodora asked, a smile playing at her lips. Grady turned to face her fully, his expression serious yet tender. I'm offering you a home, Theodora, and, if you're willing, a future together. We've only known each other a week, she reminded him softly. Sometimes a week is enough to know what matters. He took her hand, his touch gentle. When I found you that night, I was just trying to do the right thing. I didn't expect to find someone who made this place finally feel like home. Someone who reads poetry by firelight and understands what it means to build something from nothing. Tears welled in Theodora's eyes. When you covered me with your coat that night, you didn't just protect my dignity, you restored my faith that good men exist. Is that a yes? Hope brightened his green-gold eyes. In answer, Theodora leaned forward and pressed her lips to his attentive kiss that quickly deepened as Grady pulled her closer. When they finally parted, both breathless, the last rays of sunset gilded them in light that seemed to promise a golden future. I should warn you, Grady said, his forehead resting against hers. Ranching is hard work. There'll be tough times. I'm stronger than I look, Theodora replied, and we'll face those times together. 6 months later, as winter settled over the Kansas prairie, Theodora stood at the window of their expanded cabin, watching snow drift down in the fading light. Behind her, Grady added another log to the fire, the flames illuminating the changes they'd made to their home shelves now lined with books, curtains at the windows, a larger bed built by Grady's own hands. On her finger gleamed a simple gold band, placed there 3 months earlier by the same minister who had just appointed her the official school teacher for the coming spring term. Life had fallen into a rhythm that satisfied them both, Grady tending the growing herd of cattle, Theodora preparing to teach while keeping their home and helping with the ranch. What are you thinking about? Grady asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. How different my life would be if you hadn't ridden into that alley that night, she replied, leaning back against his chest. How a single act of kindness can change everything. I'm the fortunate one, he murmured against her hair. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. As they stood together, watching night settle over their land, Theodora reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the terror of that night in Dodge City to the peace of their shared life, from a torn dress to a coat offered in protection, from strangers to partners in every sense. Outside, the prairie winds carried the promise of spring beneath winter's temporary rain, just as their love carried the promise of all the seasons yet to come. Each one to be faced together, with dignity and courage, come what may.